I want to welcome you to our second monthly Zoom meeting, virtual membership meeting. And if you haven't already, please make sure that your microphone is muted. Out of consideration to others, please keep it muted until you'd like to speak and during our Q&A. As I mentioned last time, Sjca is our work is about connection, connecting you to resources, partners, and each other. We are very excited to connect with you in this digital space during this difficult time. And we're looking forward to your participation and sharing your current interests, your triumphs, your challenges, as well as how Sjca can empower you to reach your goals. This is a difficult time for all of us in arts, history, and culture. And, we ask, how do we stay afloat when government support is unsure and our usual donors are giving to COVID funds, which might not even include the arts? Will we be able to continue to engage our audience, even if it's only digitally? When should we plan to see our audience again? Is this time an opportunity to reach new audiences? And that might be the key. Reaching new audiences is not only an opportunity, but I really truly believe our sustainability depends on it. So as many of you know, we started out the year with the theme of equity and inclusion. It was the topic of our annual meeting in Cape May last September. We didn't realize it at the time how relevant DEI was to become over the course of this year. And I just want to get a sense from all of you where you are on if you've started work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or if you, have a formal plan. So if you would take this poll, Julie, if you'd put up the poll, just so we get a sense of where we all are. Okay, Julie,
It looks like some people are still answering. We've got 25 of 30 answers so far. It looks to be about half and half. We've got 42% saying yes, they have a formal plan, 12% saying no, and 46% saying not yet.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad those of you who don't have a formal plan or don't know where to begin are on this call, because hopefully you'll know where to begin after this presentation. As our organizations face the health, economic, and racial crisis going on all around us, we have to consider new ways of being. Never waste a good pandemic that is dismantling the way we do business. As we rebuild our organizations, let's consider putting diversity, equity, and inclusion at the center of our values. Let's make sure that as we rebuild South Jersey's cultural community, that all voices will be heard and power will be shared. We all need each other to thrive again, and collaboration will be the key to our survival and sustainability. And collaboration also makes for even more interesting art. So that's a great motivation. Where do we begin as mostly white organizations to become more inclusive internally in our organization, as well as making programming more culturally relevant to everyone that lives in the Southern region? About 2 years ago, I attended the Philadelphia Cultural Alliance's annual meeting to hear a presentation by Nina Simon on becoming a more inclusive organization. This year, when Art Pride was planning its biannual conference, Thrive Conference, they asked, which speaker have you heard that has inspired you the most over the last few years? Nina came to mind, and Sjca suggested her as a keynote. And although the conference was canceled this year, we hope we It will be rescheduled for next year, and she will be our keynote, so we get a sneak preview. We are very lucky. After learning about her organization, I knew that her affordable network would offer the step-by-step direction, the organization, the tools, and the coaching necessary to make our efforts successful. Sjca signed up and began our journey in April. We're so excited by what we're learning. I shared some about our switch to asset-based planning, replacing our needs-based planning in the recent newsletter. I think it was yesterday you received the newsletter, and I talked about how we're shifting in our thinking. And I will continue to write about our journey in our monthly newsletter to be transparent and hoping to inspire you to join this international cohort, which gives you everything you need to create successful change. We didn't have a large budget. We didn't have, our board still needs to be, we need to diversify our board and our staff, and how do you jump in rather than just talking about it? And I found this incredibly helpful. Sjca's hope is that we can start our own learning community right here in South Jersey. I was delighted to learn on last month's call that all of you wanted to learn more about the Change Network. And I'm so grateful that Nina Simon graciously accepted our invitation. And I want to introduce this amazing woman. I was gonna just take her title, but I think we need a minute to just, you got to hear. During the majority of her career, Nina has worked as an independent consultant and exhibition designer with an expertise in social technology, gaming, and participatory design. During this time, she worked with over 100 museums and cultural centers all around the world. Nina is perhaps best known for her work as an author and public speaker. Over the years, she has spoken to a multitude of audiences about her participatory audience and programming philosophy. Most notably, she has appeared on TEDx and was keynote speaker at the AFTA conference on National Arts Marketing Project, with that project. And hopefully, most notably, Art Pride's Thrive Conference in 2021. Previously, Nina has held the position of curator at the Tech Museum of Innovation in San Jose and was the Experience Development Specialist at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. She was the executive director of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, as well as working as an adjunct professor at the University of Washington Museology program, where she teaches a course on social technologies in exhibition design. In addition, she is the principal of a design firm called Museum 2.0, which works internationally with museums, libraries, and cultural institutions to create educational programs and audience-driven exhibitions. She authors Museum 2.0 blog, which has about 16,000 readers weekly. That might be an old statistic. So, and writes a column in Museum Magazine. Nina is currently a board member of the Center for the Future of Museums. She's founder, Spacemaker and CEO of By For All. And forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, but a Sjca fellow. Sjca fellows, I had to look it up, are the world's leading social entrepreneurs. They champion innovative new ideas that transform society's systems, providing benefits for everyone and improving the lives of millions of people. Nina is using her experience as an author, change leader, and activist to guide the growth and development of this global nonprofit, which has already made a difference in Sjca's little world. So I'd like to introduce Nina, and again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Karen. I too am going to share my screen. And let me grab this. Present. Okay. You should be about to see slides. I'll just give a tip. I know everybody's become a Zoom expert, but if you want to be able to see the whole slide and not see all of us, at the top where it says more, there should be a view options choice, and you can choose side by side, and then you'll see the slides next to the people if you prefer. And I'll also know, I'll put this in the comments as well in the chat, but if you want to get the slides later, if you want to stay in touch with me, you can go to this link. We'll add it to the chat as well, so you can download the slides and share them with others if you'd like. So these days, having worn different hats, I run a global nonprofit called Of, By, For All. And what I want to do today is share with you a little bit about how we are trying to demystify the work of becoming more inclusive, relevant, and equitable so that we can get moving from the what and the why and the thinking about it into the how and doing it. And I appreciate Karen also calling out that most cultural organizations in this country and frankly around most of the world are white dominant. We maybe are only recently coming to this work around inclusion and equity in particular. And so I think that just as we have all been trained in different technical skills to do our work well, to put on a show, to mount an exhibition, to write a compelling story, I think there also are technical skills and capacities we can build to do work that is truly inclusive, relevant, and equitable. I'll also note that I'm going to share a presentation. Please feel free to use the chat to ask questions. We'll have time for questions at the end, so I'm not going to answer them as we go, but that's a great place to share questions as we go. So I came to this work and to this idea around Of, By, For All based on the experience I had for 8 years running this institution, the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. Today, this institution, well, today it's closed, but it'll open again. And today it is a really thriving community center in the town where I live. But when I became its director in 2011, it was not exactly there. At the time, we had two really big problems. One was a financial crisis. We were literally on the brink of closure. We had less than a week of cash in the bank when I showed up. And we also had a relevance crisis. There were more people who knew this building used to be the county jail than knew it was a museum when I came. And when I came, we looked at this dual challenge, a challenge I think many arts organizations are facing, particularly because of the pandemic. And we said, here, we need to make a change. And we decided the fundamental change we wanted to make was to move away from this idea of institution first design, where we would design the programs, where our perspective, our objects, our ideas about what excellence looked like mattered, and shift to a community first approach, where we would get really curious about what mattered most to our community, how they engaged with art and history, and then we would become, as an institution, an expression, a celebration, and a weaving together of that community ethos around creativity, art, history, and culture. And what we realized as we started doing this work of really pivoting to be centered on our community was that it came down to three central ideas. The first was becoming more representative of our community, moving from being an almost all white staff and board, serving a mostly white audience, to saying, hey, if our people, if the exhibits we share, if the voices that are present in power here are not reflecting the diversity of our community, we believe that changing that, becoming more representative of our community, can help us appeal and connect with and understand more people. The second thing we looked at was partnership, and this idea of saying, instead of our programs being created by staff, how can programs become co-created by community members? Because if you are a Latinx teenager, like these folks are, you are more likely to feel there's a credible event if it is hosted or featuring Latinx teenagers than if it is hosted by white middle-aged museum folks. If you, and finally, I'll say that that partnership ethos and the representation ethos then led to our ability to be successful at becoming for our whole community. In the 8 years I was at the museum, we had a dramatic change. We were able to go from being in the red for 5 years and on the brink of closure to quadrupling our budget and building a $5 million expansion and an operating reserve. And in terms of audience, we went from serving 17,000 visitors a year, most of whom were white retirees and school kids, to almost 150,000 people per year who reflected the age, income, and ethnic diversity of our community. We were only able to have that success, I believe, because we became of and by our community. And so the way we look at this is, so we decided, gosh, this is a formula that has worked for us, and we started to see it at work at other community organizations we admired around the world. So in 2018, we opened this website as a place to share practices around becoming of and by the communities we wish to be for. Very quickly, we were overrun, and I realized it was my calling to leave the museum and the community I loved to focus on this global work. So today we run this Change Network program. Right now we have 43 organizations in this year-long Change Network program. I'll talk more about how the program works in a moment. We are in the final stages of the application process for our next cohort, which will start in September. As Karen mentioned, these organizations include organizations of very different budget sizes and also very different sectors. So this is a picture from our first in-person retreat, but we have groups like the Dakota County Library in Minnesota that is working to grow closer to their local Somali immigrant community. Groups like the LA River State Parks Partner, a 2-staff member organization that works to connect Latinos in East LA to the LA River. And then we have international groups like the Immigration Museum in Australia, in Melbourne, that is working to knit together different cultural communities in diaspora in Australia. So it's many organizations of many sizes, but all with an intent to move from talking about the why of equity and inclusion into the how, and to do it in a way that is really community-centered. And again, we root it very simply in these 3 words, and in this idea that the playbook is about thinking about how your board and staff can become more representative of your community, how your programs can be co-created by your community, and how that can help make you welcoming for your whole community. You don't have to join our program. I'll send you this slide and you can just follow this playbook if you want on your own. But I want to show you a little bit about how it plays out in the Change Network and the process of how we support organizations in doing this. So let me first, and let me note, I've said this a couple times in different ways, but we really think about this idea that of and by lead to for. And what we hear from our members is things like this. You know, we thought we'd been doing things of and by our community. But what we realized when we were in the program was that, like most nonprofits, we were doing things for them. We were making guesses about what they might want. We were making assumptions about who they were and what might be important to them, instead of starting by really getting to know these communities and partnering with them to make something more relevant. So let me show you an example of what this looks like. This is an example from a library in South Bend, Indiana, and they decided that the group they were really interested in focusing on was Latinx youth and families on the west side of their city. I'll just note, if it's not a common term for you, Latinx is just an all-gender term for Latinos or Latinas. And so they said, we really want to be for Latinx families. We know there are many Latinx people on the west side of South Bend. We know some of them come into the library maybe after school or on the weekend, but we don't feel like we really know how to really serve them. And so a lot of us immediately start with for. And they made some great changes in for. They started moving to bilingual signage. They trained all their front desk staff to be able to greet people in Spanish, not to have a deep conversation, but to be able to say welcome, bienvenidos, to be able to have that very brief interaction that says you're welcome here. But more importantly, then they moved into by. And they said, how could we partner with people in the Latinx community? At first, they didn't know a lot of people in the Latinx community, but because they were focused specifically on families and youth in the West Side, they could start to meet people who were leaders in that network. They met a moms group and they talked to them about story time And they ended up partnering with mothers from the West Side to deliver story times in Spanish at the West Side branch. And perhaps even more powerfully, they met with this guy, Juan, at Casa de Amistad, a social service agency on the West Side. And in talking to Juan, they didn't just focus on what could the library do for you or how could we get your folks to come to the library. They asked Juan, what's most important for young people and families in your community? What are you trying to achieve? What are some challenges you're facing? What are some things you value? And one of the things Juan brought up that was totally not on the librarian's radar was this very important thing, which was the South Bend ID program. Basically, in the city of South Bend, you can get an identification card that enables you to do things like get a driver's license or get local services, even if you don't have a federal ID. And he said, you know, this is a really powerful program. Our community really needs it, and we are not authorized as an agency to deliver it. And maybe you could tell people about it, because doesn't the library register people to vote and stuff like that? And the librarian said, whoa, we actually are able to sign people up for these cards, but we don't even put that paperwork out because nobody asks for it among our regular patrons. And so the library realized that they had a service they already knew how to do, and that if they partnered with trusted organizations in the Latinx community, what they ended up doing was doing these registration days, both at libraries, but also at Latinx organizations and festivals, to sign people up for an ID card and also to invite them to sign up for a library card as well. And it became a way the library could take an asset they already had and do real service in the community in a way that worked for them. And then finally, the partnership with Casa de Amistad also led to them creating a new youth internship in partnership with the organization focused on Latinx youth. So if you look at this in the of, by, for categories, they started on the for side with things that seemed fairly obvious to them. Then they got to know partners so that they could co-create programs. And then those relationships also led them to have more confidence about how to build pathways to employment and internships with the library. What we hear from a lot of members of our network is that doing this work and going through a step-by-step process has enabled them to shift from the insecurity and unsurety about, how could we do this, into really saying, how are we going to move forward? Let's go. I want to also acknowledge, I think that right now we're in a dual crisis, and particularly during pandemic, I think before the murder of George Floyd and the uprisings, there was a question among many organizations about how can we focus on equity and inclusion right now. And I want to really acknowledge and honor that Sjca and 9 other organizations joined our network in April, which is kind of bananas if you think about it, given everything else that was going on. But I think that they were organizations that saw how crucial real community partnerships would be to building a future that is strong and relevant and sustainable. And even now, more than because of the uprisings, I think more and more people have changed their thinking and have thought this way, that I believe that if we don't change our approach, global inequality is going to get worse. We already know the health data on the fact that Black and brown communities are dying more because of coronavirus. We know the political realities about systemic racism and oppression. And I think that when we think about what it means to come out the other side, I hope that we are looking for processes that can serve not just us doing the morally right thing of involving people in what we do, but doing the thing that is going to build a better world and healthier, more resilient organizations. So I want to walk you briefly through the process of the program, and then we'll open it up for questions. The program is a year-long program. It's a program for teams. We invite you, before you even apply, to think about who might be on a change team with you. You don't need everybody on your organization to want to do this, but you need to not be alone. And we talk about this idea of diagonal teams, which means teams where you have people at different levels of power and potentially with different departments or different areas of responsibility. so that it's not like everybody is at a low level of power and can't manage up to get something done. And it's also not like everybody's in the education department and they're siloed and unable to really get it done. So the ideal team, especially for a small organization, includes staff, includes board members, maybe includes a volunteer or a trusted community partner. The first thing we invite you to do is to create a vision of where you want to go, because we believe that if you can't create a compelling vision of where, what that inclusive future might be, then you're not going to be driven by excitement, and you're not going to be able to describe with clarity to funders and partners what you're trying to do. Then we ask you to zero in on one community of interest, a community who you see as really critical to you having that bright future you want to create. This is often a very hard step for organizations because we want to focus on so many communities who maybe we haven't had relationships with. But we always say, you're not picking your last community, you're picking the first one, the one you feel able to move forward with now. And even as Karen said, you know, them having joined in April, having just heard a little bit about some of the progress you've had with some specific partnerships, some specific conversations, we find that specificity of community makes it faster and more easy for you to get going in really getting to know folks. And for us, getting to know folks means being present with them, listening and learning from them. And being present obviously means something different in coronavirus than it means at other times. But there are a lot of ways that we can not jump to transactional, what can I do for you, what can you do for me, but instead start from a place of really hearing what matters to you, what's important to you, what challenges are you facing, and from that thinking about what might be relevant. And with those questions and answers in your head, you can start to make a plan of what are the concrete changes we want to make in the of, the by, and the for category. And then once you have a plan, what we do is really support organizations with specific tools. So if you say one piece of our plan is we want to create a community advisory board, great, we have a tool for you to diagnose what kind you might want and to hear about some of the obstacles you might run into on the way. If you say, oh, we want to change our hiring process, great, we have some tools to look at that kind of thing. And you're also getting support from each other in the network as you grow. Also note that while the program is 12 months, this is not a one and done process. It is iterative, and we're trying to equip you with a toolbox that you can use again and again. You can renew and stay in the network beyond a year, but you can also go out and use these tools in whatever way serves you best. I want to say, particularly at this time, particularly in pandemic and with all of the urgency of what we might do right now, please don't rush to make a plan right away. And I really want to encourage you to start with visioning, to start with community, so that your plan is informed by what inspires you most and what inspires your community most. And so before I open up to questions, I just want to share 3 starting points for this. In creating a vision, I invite you to dream, to sit down with your colleagues or even with yourself in your journal and to just ask yourself, in 5 to 10 years, in your best possible scenario, what does it look like when you walk into your organization? Write very specifically. I always like to write it like a journal entry. So it's like, you know, it's so hard to remember what day it is these days. It's July 23rd, 2025. I walk into the building or I walk into our concert and here's what I see. Here's what's happening. Starting to write that dream of what you want it to look like. And then pulling back and saying, who matters most? Who is critical to making that dream possible? One of the ways we like to think about communities is as these bubbles where there are lots of different communities within your city or your region. And probably your organization is already quite relevant and inclusive to some of them. And perhaps there are even some other communities you've had interest with, maybe you've had small programs with, maybe you have a fellowship for artists of color, maybe you have a teen program, ways you're trying to reach out to other communities. Excuse me. One of the things I've been seeing during coronavirus, which has been scary to me, is that I think a lot of organizations, when the shutdowns happened, shut down as well and collapsed in to focus on reminding some subset of our existing audience, in particular our existing donors, hey, we're here, don't forget about us, and trying as quickly as possible to pivot to serve them with programming. And I worry about this as a long-term sustainability model because I think we already knew that some of the audiences we were serving were perhaps not the future who were going to be critical to us being sustainable, relevant, and resilient. And the organizations I've seen be strongest during this time that I've been inspired by in our network are taking a different approach. They're saying, how could we instead focus out here? How could we use this as a time to listen and learn about those communities who might be important to our future, so that after the pandemic, instead of it looking like this, maybe it could look like this? Let me give you a quick example. One of the other members who joined us in April is Casa Santa Ana. They're a contemporary art center in Panama City, Panama. Very small, one staff member. And historically, as many contemporary art centers, they, or I guess I'll just note, they have had a audience and a community constituency that is really focused on two groups: international touring contemporary artists and local art lovers, mostly elites. They're also those situated in the Santa Ana neighborhood, which is a very low income, very family oriented neighborhood. And they joined the Change Network because they said, we know we will only be successful if we cannot be seen as something elite plopped into this neighborhood, but if we really are in relationship with Santa Ana. And so here was their situation, classic. They had these traditional communities they had served well, and then they had these communities of interest, particularly local artists and families in the neighborhood. And again, they had a couple of small programs, a school program, trying to reach out, but they weren't going as far as they wanted to in partnership with their communities of interest. So when the pandemic happened, what happened? Their traditional communities shrunk. International artists are not traveling, local art lovers were not coming out, but the opportunities in their community of interest grew. And Carolina, who is the very impassioned director of Casa Santa Ana, said, I felt like there was both an opportunity and a responsibility for us to focus on the Santa Ana neighborhood now. Because if we're saying we want to be in relationship with them, if we can't be in relationship at a time of great challenge, at a time of great struggle, how can we imagine that we'll be in relationship with them at a time of abundance? And so they did many things, but a couple of things they did that were really inspiring. One is that they became the lead food distribution center for the whole neighborhood. They raised tens of thousands of dollars and gave out thousands of bags of food. At first, those bags of food just came with a little note in them that said, from your neighbors at Casa Santa Ana, we love you, we're thinking of you. As time went on, they started putting art supplies in the bags. They started inviting people to draw, and particularly kids to draw and to give that back. And they're building an exhibition that is partly including some of the artwork made through this food bag transaction. Another thing they did was they turned their very active social media account over to celebrating local artists in the Santa Ana neighborhood, and particularly illustrators and cartoonists. And so they were using their platform to support artists who maybe they wouldn't have seen as part of their artist platform before. And I believe this is leading them in a direction post-pandemic to have the relationships to make this possible, to grow closer to the communities that mattered most to their vision of success, and to also be bringing in and bringing back those communities who have been home right now. And then the last thing I'll share as a tool you can use when you get to planning, and I want to talk about this specifically to the uprisings around systemic racism, is to think about it in a couple of axes. We put out for free on our website this framework for action in response to moments of outraging crisis. The link, you don't need to write it down. I include it here so when you have the slides, you have it, but you can also just find it on our homepage. And we very quickly moved after George Floyd was murdered to share this framework. And the basic idea is this, that we believe in any moment of crisis, whether it's caused by global unrest, whether it's caused by a national disaster, whether it's caused by some inciting incident, there are two ways to look at this. There's external action you can do, and there's internal action you can take. And you can act in the immediate and in the longer term. I think in the last month and a half, there's been a lot of focus on the immediate. Immediate actions on externally might look like public statements that Black Lives Matter, might look like pivoting programming, might look like offering direct support, like you see how some theaters have been opening their lobbies for protesters. Immediate action internally might be support for healing and for rest for staff of color who are disproportionately impacted. If you're an all-white team, it might mean doing some reflection on whiteness and where we want to go next. I want to just note that while the immediate is important and is getting a lot of attention, some organizations are not equipped to respond in the immediate, or they're responding in clumsy or imperfect ways. Some of them are even getting called out for it, not making a statement fast enough, not making a statement that's legitimate, being performative. There's a lot going on around this. And I want to just note, particularly to those of us who are white, that while the immediate is important, I believe the longer term is as, if not more important. And I invite you not to get exhausted or so overwhelmed by the immediate that it taps and saps all the energy you could put in the longer term. Because these immediate things are very helpful, but the longer term is where we're going to see real change. The longer term is where you might really decide to deepen partnerships or change security policies at your events. The longer term is where you might say, hey, we need to change our hiring pipeline and how we do this, or we need to change the composition of our board and our processes. That's where real change is going to happen. This framework was developed with leadership from our programs team, which are all people of color, led by Raquel Thompson, who's a Black woman. And Raquel has said, that the number one thing she wants white people to think about right now is, she talks about this protest sign she's seen Black people hold that says, white people, don't let go of this when the news cycle is over. And I think that even if we are imperfect in the immediate, even if we are doing things wrong, I know I am doing things wrong in the immediate, please garner your energy, work with others to figure out what the longer term could look like, because I believe that's where real change will happen. So with that, I'll leave you with kind of our core question. What would it look like? What could be possible if arts and cultural organizations were of, by, and for everyone? And I invite us all to make it happen together. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. I invite you to add questions into the chat. I'll share the link into the chat as well. And then I think we have some more time for questions, right, Karen?
Yes, we do. So please go ahead and put your questions into the chat, or unmute yourself, and hopefully we'll recognize you there. Any questions on the process, or what kind of organization it works best for, or how much time does it take? We are all so under-resourced. It's overwhelming to think about taking on anything.
Sorry, Rachel, I saw you raise a hand. Do you have a question?
I would love to ask a question. Hi, Nina. My name is Rachel Dukeman. I also saw you speak to the Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance meeting a couple years ago. I'm on their Emerging Leader Council. I love how you said about having it be like a diagonal panel of people who would start to get involved in this. So it's not just top down, so that it's board, it's staff, it's other stakeholders. I'm wondering from your experience if you could speak a little bit more about who maybe would be a good spearhead, like who would be the right, because I hear a lot in Philadelphia specifically, where there's been a few organizations where like line level staff have started to like really make major progress, but it's only once the board gets on board that things start to change. So I would love to sort of hear from your experience, who and how.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And yeah, I've certainly been following. I mean, I think that the Philadelphia, the Free Library, also there's obviously voices coming saying, hey, this must change from the front line. So what we've seen, and it's shifted a little bit, I would say, this year. We have seen though, so we've had, we've total had 65 organizations go through, and we have done some third-party research. And what we've found is that it depends a little bit based on staff size, but that the most effective teams are championed by, and we do have a role called Team Champion where that person is doing more work than others. the ideal champion in a mid or large size organization is not the ED. It's somebody who is a senior leader, maybe mid-level, maybe VP level, who is deeply committed to equity inclusion and has the support of their director and has enough power to get people into a meeting. And so what we find, and then I'll just say, in a smaller organization, I would say under 10 people, usually the most effective team champion is the ED because of the size. I will say that during pandemic in particular, as I've been talking to EDs, particularly of mid-sized and larger organizations, there's been a real question of, as the leader, should I be the champion of this? Because is it saying something if I'm not the champion? But what we've seen is that, frankly, people are so taxed by all the things they're dealing with right now that you want a champion who can be set up for success and who can really be given the resources and the time to be able to do the work. So we have seen that the most effective champions have enough power to be able to get to call a meeting and have people at different levels show up, but not at the top where they might be pulled into a million things and not be able to have this be one of their lead projects. I would say that there are some organizations, we've seen it be quite effective when they're, as we all know, there are some brave and really highly impacted people of color working in white dominant organizations. And we have quite a few organizations where the team champion might be the only or the first or the most senior person of color on the staff. There's a whole other thing about people of color leading inclusion work, and should that be what you have to, anyway, but we have seen that there are some organizations where there's been a leveraging benefit to have a team champion who may feel like, hey, I've been brought in to make this kind of change, but I kind of like would benefit from having the credibility and getting the team together, but then having them hear from some white, black, and brown people from a global organization, you know, so we think a lot about kind of that power element. But in terms of getting the work done, we've seen that the most successful teams have people who are energized, who are in different levels in different areas, and led by somebody with enough power to bring people together and with enough time and energy to really focus on it. It's interesting that we have not actually seen a difference so far between teams that have the ED on them versus have the ED just as a supportive person. We have seen a difference, though, in having a board member involved. And the reason there has been mostly because, similar to on staff, there often are a few board members, maybe who've come in the last few years, who may be people of color, or who may be people who came in with an inclusion emphasis, but who themselves feel marginalized within the context of the board. So in some ways, we've found that there are organizations where at first they were quite nervous about involving a board member, but then they found that the board member on their team was like, finally, I get to work on some of this stuff. And then they became much more vocal in board meetings and thinking in a savvy way about how to politically move this work into the board side as well.
That's great. That's very helpful. Thank you for that. That's elucidating.
Anne-Marie Miller asked a question about, let's see, Anne-Marie, what has been accomplished at Sjca since April? And when I think about it, quite a lot. It's being involved in the network, and visioning was a very important step for us because we know it's so important to our sustainability, but what do we really want to see? And that kicked it off for us. And first we had our two staff members when we talk about this change team. And we picked a board member, Lisa Honecker from Stockton, who has been our fearless leader and will be reporting to the board at the board meetings. You know, it was, we didn't know how to make these changes because, again, we were all white. And so what we did in this committee was to reach out to we were thinking that the demographics say that the largest group other than white is, half of our territory, which is 8 counties, have more people of color than whites living in them. So, you know, it's something we knew we needed to pay attention to, and the largest group was Latinx, and we knew we couldn't look at the whole, all 8 counties at once, so we focused on Latinx artists and cultural leaders in Atlantic County. And so we found somebody who was affiliated with Stockton. She's Latinx, and her job title is, I think, Associate Director of Admissions. But she's so keyed into the community and the Latinx community, and is on the board of all these organizations. So she's been wonderful in helping us frame out how we could possibly introduce ourselves to that community and really start to uncover and engage some of the leaders in that community, cultural leaders. And we also included an artist who has been a South Jersey artist for many years, and knows all the South Jersey artists in the area. Also, she is Latinx. So just forming that committee was a relief to engage diverse opinions. And you know, they helped us create the vision. They helped us figure out which community we're trying to, the community of interest Nina mentioned. And we, with questions that were developed by the By For All, we have now just started to connect with the community we've been talking about. It took us this long to really figure out who we wanted to talk to and shift our vision to make sure that we're doing it not for the community, but with and by the community. So it's we are just about to start the outreach, and very excited. So Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to add to that, or Julie.
We have started outreach. I've reached out to 3 grassroots Latinx artists that I know. Well, that Joyce Hagan knows better than I, but she helped me get contact information for them. And then Jessica is reaching out to HAC, which is a large, the Hispanic Alliance of Atlantic County, which is a very important organization, and has given us information about different publications to, you know, things where things would be advertised that the different Latinx communities in AC or in Atlantic County would notice, would be familiar with, and would go to for information. So it has begun, and then there will be a survey that we're developing for a brief phone interview per By For All's instructions. So it's underway, and you know, hopefully it'll go well, and as Nina said earlier, we'll be able to make it through this progress and then do it again and again and again. So, but it's so far, I think the step-by-step nature of it is very helpful, because accomplishing the discrete goals makes it less overwhelming and just more manageable. So I really applaud the tools that we've been introduced to so far, and also Karen and Julie's work, because though I'm putatively the leader of the committee, they are the real leaders of the committee. And I appreciate their contributions enormously. They're really making this go. And I think that displays the commitment of the organization as well.
I know that Iveta had a question, and I see a question from Megan as well. I'd love to take Megan's question and then come to Iveta. Megan asks about tools or advice on working with stakeholders who are resistant or feel threatened by the work. Super real. And so a couple of things I'd say. One is you're never going to get everybody. I always think about a friend of mine who comes from a political family, and he says, you know, count the votes. If you're trying to win an election, I was about to make an editorial comment I won't make, but you don't focus on the people who are never going to vote for you. You focus on energizing your base and getting the people who are wondering, who are in the middle. I will say that I've been very driven by this quote by the guys who wrote Switch, of what to, you know, how to change when change is hard, by Dan and Chip Heath. They say, you know, what often looks like resistance to change is often lack of clarity. And one of the reasons, as Lisa was saying, we take such a step-by-step approach is to say, maybe some people are resistant because there's just a big old question mark in their head about what the heck this might possibly mean for them, for their job, for their da-da-da-da. And the reality, in my experience, because I've led change like this and been involved in many change processes, is that for some people it's lack of clarity, and for some people they really don't like it. And so, but at least giving the benefit of saying, hey, you're not out from the beginning. I'm inviting you in. Here's what the process will look like. You have the option to be part of this. It is happening, whether you like it or not. And then there is a lot around how you build momentum, how you move through a change process. I would say in the beginning, it's about how do you get started with a team who's motivated and with enough support from the top to get going, so you can bank some early wins that start to change the conversation. And actually, if you go to that link I shared with the slides, you'll also see there, and we'll email it to you as well, a link to this 3-minute self-assessment we have about, are you ready to lead a revisioning process? And really that's based on both, are you excited about it, but also, do you have the internal capacity? Do you have the support from above? And we feel like both that energy and excitement and the capacity are really critical to being able to get started. Iveta, do you want to ask the last question in this hour?
Thank you very much, Nina. This is very inspiring. I just wanted to say, I direct the Folk Life Center, which is a part of Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center. So our work by nature is to work with diversity and inclusion and relevance, and all the more than 60 different ethnic communities that we've worked with, that were always deeply engaged in our programming. However, when the crisis came and things became difficult for everyone, people keep asking me about possibilities of virtual experiences that will help us keep connected with them and possibly even expand to other communities. Yeah, we are making certain steps towards this, but I was wondering whether you can have a few good examples to share with us as to what people are doing with their communities in this difficult time.
Yeah, I think there are many
virtual reality of today.
Yeah, there's so many examples of digital programming, and I think that what I have found most inspiring is people who continue to take this community first and this co-creative approach, and not just deliver, not just push out, here are all our performances, or here's our curriculum, go use it. And so, for example, I've been really inspired. One of our members from the beginning, who's in your area, is Arts Philadelphia. They're an organization that does arts work with people with dementia and their caregivers. And they gave an incredible talked to the rest of our membership just a few weeks ago about how they are not just how they're pivoting these community circles they run with caregivers and with people with dementia, and how they've had to really be thoughtful about how to use technology. So for them, it started with asking their members, do you have devices? Is Zoom something you're using, or is something like Facebook more comfortable for you? And then even one thing they did, which I thought was just brilliant, is, you know, people with dementia, you know, have some memory challenges. And so they actually made, and they've been mailing cards. One of the things they mailed out was like a photograph of the Zoom kind of boxes, like the Brady Bunch boxes, of the members of the group with all their names, so that while you're on a call, you could be looking at who these people are to keep remembering who you're talking to. And so they were really thoughtful about, how do we start with what works for this community? Another example that is more on the co-creation side, I've been seeing organizations do really brilliant things around inviting people to unlock their own creativity during this time. There's an organization in our network called the Center for Democracy in Australia, who've been running this thing called Stitch and Resist, where people are cross-stitching their kind of messages of activism and resistance, and then there's kind of sharing happen around that creative practice. So again, getting away from this push institution first model and into this of, by, for, and community first model. That's what I've been holding as I look at all this digital programming. I know we're at the end of the hour. I have to go. I shared the link so you can get in touch with me. I'm sure Karen wants to wrap in some way, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Nina. Look forward to many more in the cohort. Thanks again for joining us. We are coming to the end, and I just wanted to make sure that you all see there's an evaluation link in the, so if you would take a short survey about today's virtual connection session, and also give us some information on who you might want to hear talk, other than me, in the next in next month's Zoom session. So thank you all for attending. I hope, you know, if you want to talk more about the network and how, you know, the questions like how much time it takes and that kind of thing, feel free to contact me. And Nina makes herself so accessible, and if you have questions, you can certainly follow up with her. So thank you all for joining us this month, and it was so good to see all of your faces, and look forward to seeing you again next month. Julie, do you have any?
No, I don't really have anything else to add. I know everyone's probably got another Zoom meeting to jump on, but I did put the link to the survey. Please let us know how we're doing, if there's something we can be doing better, if there's a topic that you are interested in for future calls. And as always, you can always reach out to Karen or I if you have any questions at any time about this or anything else that SJCA can do to support you in this time.
That was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivana.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you. It was wonderful.